This is episode number 150, and today I talk about the Goulet Pens in the early days, fountain pens in space and if they'll work, and what fountain pens mean to me on a personal level. Hey, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and this is episode number 150 of Goulet Q&A. And honestly, I wish I'd kind of done something more special. It just kind of hit at this really bad time. It was the end of the year. Rachel and I were gone out of town to be with our family around Christmas time, and just kind of came back to the new year and didn't really get anything big planned for the milestone of 150. Not that that's like a guaranteed milestone kind of thing. So I don't know. I think I have a pretty solid Q&A today here, but I don't have anything too crazy. We did a big thing at 100, maybe at 200 we'll do something really crazy. But anyway, this thing's been going for a while. 150 is pretty cool, so I just wanted to pause and reflect on that for a second. Yeah, it's gonna be a nice solid Q&A here for you today. Had some good family time over the holidays here. It's always really interesting for us around here because the holidays come, we're an e-commerce business, it's retail, it's crazy coming up into the whole holiday season is really busy for us. And then we have a lot of people taking time off. The weather's changing around here, especially in central Virginia. It gets cold, it gets hot, it gets crazy, so people's sinuses go nuts and everybody's getting sick all the time. And so we're losing people, and then people are on vacation, and it's all just nuts. So it's always an adventure. I do feel like it went really smoothly. My team is awesome. We really handled things pretty darn well, all things considered, but it's always a little bit challenging. And then we come back and we have to do year-end physical inventory. I think I touched on this in previous Q&A, but we did all that. Rachel and I were actually gone while that was going on, so that was kind of neat for us to actually be able to take a week off. It's kind of cool. You kind of feel like you made it in your business, when you're able to actually take some substantial time off. So that was pretty cool. It is kind of a little bit of a bummer this week. I alluded to this. If you follow our newsletter, our email newsletter, I alluded to this in the personal message. I shared with you guys that we had a miscarriage this past summer. It was a very hard loss for us. This week is the due date for when we would have had the baby. So we got a lot of tears, a lot of holding each other and just kind of, working through the grief. We've been told by others who've been through it that when the due date rolled around, that was kind of a big thing. And we know in June, when we have the anniversary of the miscarriage, that's also going to be a painful experience. So we're working through that right now. I had very kind of just a downer personal message in the email newsletter. To be honest, that's just where we're at. So we're working through it now. We're actually doing a lot better a couple days later here. But, it's just sometimes you just have to work through that stuff. So, a lot of stuff, it's like right at the turn of the new year and it's reflecting on 2016. It was really kind of a hard year for me and Rachel. But I still can't help but to just look at the good and be super optimistic. And so, if nothing else good comes out of that whole situation, then us appreciating our family more and being able to send you kind of a positive message that if you end up in a situation similar to that, you can go on, things do get better. So that's kind of the heavy stuff that I'll get in the Q&A this week. I got a lot of lighter stuff that goes on, but this is kind of in memory of our Hannah Grace that we lost. We're taking adequate time to mourn this week. I did have, back to business here. I had an interview with a guy named Jonathan Weiss, and he has a podcast. It's kind of a business, entrepreneur-related podcast. He ended up talking to me for like an hour and a half. He didn't cut me off for a while, so I literally filled up until I had a meeting I had to go to. But talked really good podcast. I actually did this back in June, the week after the miscarriage happened, because the scheduling was crazy and I didn't want to reschedule it. So I did it back then, and it just went public. So I figured the Q&A, crowd, fan base would really appreciate that particular interview because I really go deep on it. It's long form, hour and a half. I think you really appreciate it, especially if you're interested in kind of starting a business or you have a business or anything like that. You get to hear more of the details kind of that, like I share, if we hear from time to time. So check that out. I got a link on our blog. I can't link it up in the YouTube description, but I got it in the blog, so you can check that out, or you can just Google it or whatever. As far as products go, not a whole ton of new stuff. We do have a lot of things that we're looking into, so you may hear of stuff coming over in the month. But as it is right now, the big thing that we're preparing for is Robert Auster inks. So he's in Australia, and you know, pretty cool ink colors. Fire and Ice is like on fire on Instagram right now, and we're gonna have that soon. So it's gonna be pretty cool. We're starting out. He's got a full line of like about 60 ink colors. We're starting out with, you know, upper 30s, so it'll be a nice color range. It's got like a lot of colors that are pretty similar to each other. There's some duplicates that we're not going to carry, but figure we come up pretty strong. He doesn't have a whole lot of exposure for his brand, so I think it'll be a big hit. So check those out when we have those up. It's kind of exciting. We carry a whole new ink brand. That's kind of cool. And then the other thing that's kind of note this month, this was actually kind of news to me even. You'd think I would have heard everything at this point, but you've heard of probably NaNoWriMo, which is going to be coming up next month. It's the International Correspondence Writers Month. That's where you mail a letter or a postcard to somebody every day. And then you have NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writers Month. So that's where you novel 50,000 words in a single month. That's in November. We just kind of passed that. But there's something that happens actually 4 times a year, and January is one of those months. But it's the National Journal Writers Month, NaNoWriMo. I hadn't heard of this one, but it seems pretty cool. I checked out the website, so I have no professional affiliation with them at all. I just think it's kind of cool because it's a similar concept to all these other ones. It's just promoting journal writing. So if you're not into mailing letters to strangers or writing a whole story and really committing to that, NaNoWriMo is a pretty big commitment. The journal writing thing is really pretty loose. It's the site has some tips and prompts and things like that for journal writing. Personally, I do journaling, bullet journal a little bit, and then I just do personal journaling to kind of reflect on things, and I end up writing a lot by hand in my business just because it triggers my brain in a different way. So I'm a big proponent of doing that. So I'm trying to participate in that this month is just writing something in your journal every day for 30 days. So there's all kinds of creative prompts you can do, or it's just self-reflection, whatever it is. It's kind of cool having that at the first of the year. It gives you a chance to kind of reflect on the previous year and whatnot. So it's kind of cool. You may just want to check that out. It really fits into the whole writing thing, so I thought I would mention it. So let's get into the questions here. Some pen writing questions, and this is from Archimage on Twitter, or is it Archimage? I'm not exactly sure. You can probably correct me because we tweet a lot, but let me know. Does a fountain pen work in space? That's a excellent question that I'm sure is on everybody's mind because it's very pertinent and relevant to everything. So, got some hot tea today. Really a fan of the tea lately. So yes, it should work in space because contrary to what you might think, fountain pens do not work by gravity. They work by capillary action. So there's kind of 2 components to this, and I'm going to use this nice little Lamy Vista clear here to demonstrate. So pun intended, but not really, because that's kind of what it's for. It's literally a demonstrator. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So this pen shows kind of a demonstration of basically how most fountain pens are working. So if you're not familiar with fountain pen, how they work, you have an ink chamber right here, which is represented by this converter, which clips onto the pen. It could be a whatever piston filler, it could be a whole body filled with ink. Whatever the situation is, the concept is the same. You have an ink chamber that attaches to a feed that runs through the pen that then brings ink to the nib that allows it to write. So the contact of the nib on the page is what causes that capillary action to really make the connection to the paper. But that capillary action is actually happening through the entire feed. If you actually pull out the feed, which I probably shouldn't use a Lamy for this example because the feeds are not super easy to pull out. Let me see if I can get it, but I have another pen if I can't do it. Give me a second. Should have planned this better. You'd think I'd know by 150 episodes. All right, I'm gonna use a different pen. Noodler's Ahab. Feed's a lot easier to pull out on this pen, or so I thought. Okay, there we go. So this pen, you can kind of see it here, but it's representative of basically all other fountain pen feeds. It has a slit that's cut all the way down the feed that connects from the ink chamber up to the tip, which is where the nib fits on, and ink travels up this little slit. So that capillary action is what actually draws the ink through it. So whether you're in space or not, it doesn't really matter. as long as you have ink in that feed. Now, the issue that you will have in space is you will not necessarily have an easy way for the ink to make contact with the back of that feed in here. So if you're using a pen and writing with it, it's going to draw the ink through the feed. And if you're in space, there's no gravity here. Eventually, it's going to use up the ink that's making contact with the back of that feed. And you're going to have ink kind of sitting in the back of the pen here that has an air bubble that's cutting it off from writing. So it's not going to write fully. So you're going to need to kind of compress the piston down so that you can make that ink contact with the feed again. Now, I don't know why I'm giving you super practical advice for using a fountain pen in space, because the odds of any of you using this in space is probably pretty low, but if you do, let me know. I would love to be in touch with you about that, but that's the concept anyway. It's the same kind of thing that if you're writing with a pen and your ink is kind of hanging up in the back, you know, that happens with certain converters, certain pens every now and then. The ink hangs up in the back and it breaks the flow, and you're like, I know I filled this pen, why is it not writing? It's because the ink is not making contact with the back of that feed. If it is making contact with the back of the feed, it will flow through because that capillary action will draw it through. That's how it works. So theoretically, yes, it'll work in space, but even if you're not in space, even if you're writing upside down, it'll still work. It doesn't have anything to do with gravity. It's not pressurized or anything like that. If you have ink in here and it's making contact, it'll write in any direction in any gravity situation. Pretty cool, huh? The only time that it may cause you problems, I'm thinking practically, is if you are well, I'm trying to think. No, the pen self-equalize. It's not even if, I was thinking if you're flying and writing in certain ascension or descension, but no, it self-equalizes. So really you're in pretty good shape, however you're writing, as long as that ink is making contact. All right, this next question is from Sara H on Facebook. I understand the thought process behind a Waverly nib, but I still can't quite figure it out. When or why would you suggest using a Waverly nib? So Waverly nib, as far as I know, it's not a vastly popular nib. The only pen that I can think that has it available on it new is the Pilot Custom 912, which I have right here. And I have the Waverly nib, and I even inked it up for you so I can show you what's going on. So the Waverly nib, if I can zoom in and show you what it all is all about, the Pilot Custom 912, you know, it's got a lot of different nib sizes. This is kind of the pen format that Pilot is using in the US to bring in some unique nibs. You know, in Japan, they have unique nibs that they put on a lot of different pens to bring all of those kind of odd nibs that are not that popular in the US on all the different pens would be, you know, that's just something that Pilot USA doesn't really want to take the gamble on. So they standardize on the Custom 912 as the pen that has the weird nibs, right? And the Waverly is one of those weird nibs. Those are my words, not theirs. So if I zoom in and show you, basically, you'll probably, those of you that deal with fountain pens a lot, you'll probably be able to tell in a second what's different about this nib. But take a look at it. It looks like it's bent. Like it looks like it's broken, right? So the tip of the nib actually bends up like that, as if it was bent. Now, if you look at a picture like this on a, you know, Instagram picture or something like that, if somebody that did this with their Flex pen, you would be like, oh my gosh, this pen is not going to write. But it actually writes really smoothly and really nice. I'm trying to get you a good angle so you can see. It keeps wanting to focus on my stubble. So anyway, that nib kind of bends up like that. And functionally, it's not drastic what it does. I'll show you the writing that I have here with the Waverly nib. It kind of writes like a fine nib, you know, kind of between a fine and a medium. It's only one nib size per se, but I find it to write, you know, pretty all around. You know, it's not like super fine, but it kind of can go between fine and medium. And the real thing about it is, if you're holding the pen, and I'm showing you my writing surface here, if you're holding the pen at a very steep angle, the bend of that nib allows it to not be pointing directly down into the page. In order to do that, you would have to have it like overbent like this, and that's just crazy. So if you had it straight up and down, or maybe just a little bit like that, the nib is going to be bent a little bit more, as if you had the pen more at a 45-degree angle, because that nib kind of flares out like that. So it actually writes remarkably smooth, even at a perfectly upright angle. So that's one benefit, and especially in Japan, you know, a lot of the nibs, they write more upright like that. If you hold the pen at a lower angle, it actually is going to write as if you were kind of, painting with the pen, which normally if you tried to do that, your feed is going to hit the page and it's not going to work very well. But it's going to write a lot wetter and it's going to write broader. So that is reflected here in the writing I did. Same exact pen, so I wrote with it upright, and it's definitely a finer line and not as heavy ink. And I did a lower angle, which looks a lot broader, a lot wetter for sure, so it makes the ink look a little darker, a little more shading. So that's the difference that you can see here. I use Diamine Marine because it's, a nice shading ink that shows that variation a little bit. But, it's not incredible. It's definitely not as much like, you're not going to be flexing it, or anything like that. You're not going to be changing that variation of size. It's not like a flex pen or a stub or anything like that, where you're going to be getting a lot of variation within the same word, unless you are literally changing your pen angle like this. It's more just, if you want to, you have a little bit kind of more of a medium or a broader nib and you're low angle writing, and then you're writing on, some more absorbent paper or something like that, and you want to shift up to a higher angle and still have it write smoothly and write well, you can do that with the Waverly. So very niche, very kind of specific, not like, whoa, that's crazy, but that kind of explains what it is. So it's a unique pen. I think it's kind of interesting. So it's not a lot of pens that have that nib, but still I wanted to show it to you so you had a little bit more of an idea of how it works. All right, this next question is from Ann P. on Facebook. I got my first flex pen, the Noodler's Ahab Navajo, for Christmas. Yay! Even more beautiful than in pictures. I'm glad you like it. But I'm a bit hesitant. I finally stopped using tons of pressure on my regular fountain pens. So my question is twofold. How much pressure is too much? I feel like the tines are barely opening up even when I'm pressing down pretty hard. And over time, do Noodler's flex nibs become flexier with more use? Okay, so I have an Ahab right here that I can show you what's going on. It made its appearance a question or two earlier, but so these pens are steel nibs. Most flex pens, especially flex pens of old, have been gold nibs because gold is a softer metal. It's a little bit easier to flex with them, but you can overdo it with gold, and gold is expensive, and to get gold nibs to flex requires a lot of finesse, a lot of hand tuning, and special stuff to make those happen. That's why there's not a lot of them around. Noodler's was pretty innovative when they came out with a steel nibbed flex pen. Now it's not a wet noodle, very, specific flex pen term there. It's not where you just like apply a little bit of pressure and you flex that thing out. You gotta go for the gusto. So especially if you are just getting used to not writing with a lot of pressure, it's gonna feel somewhat unnatural for you to write with some pressure. So I'm going to try to show you here. It's a little weird for me to be holding the pad in midair and trying to write this, but if you're writing, I'm writing with a pretty decent amount of pressure, and the nib is bending, but the tines are not really flexing apart so much. Okay, it's a little bit, but I'm applying more pressure than I would basically to any other fountain pen. And the key here is really to make sure that you have a proper angle, like a 45-degree angle. If you're holding your pen up here, you can apply all the pressure you want, and it is not going to flex out because you're just not applying the right amount of leverage. The lower you hold the pen, the more leverage you have on those tines. So if I'm holding it right here, and I'll try to do it, so that you can really see what's going on, I can flex that thing out to a pretty good degree. And you can get a good 2.5, 3 millimeter spread on that nib, and it'll bend back and be just fine. In order to over flex this nib to the point where it would actually cause it harm, you have to basically use two hands and try to do it. It's pretty tough. Like the 7 fountain pen mistakes video that we did, when Jenny, had to try to bend that nib, she had to mash the thing down there. So you can abuse these things pretty good, and you can get replacement nibs too for only a couple of bucks. And so you can really go for it. But you have to really kind of go against your own goodwill or your own better judgment of what you would normally do on a fountain pen. Because you're applying so much more pressure. But as you're doing it, and you always have to do it in a pulling motion as well. If you're trying to do it on the cross stroke, it's going to be unnatural. If your pen angle is too high, it's not going to flex out much. You got to make sure your pen angle is low, that you're applying pressure, especially down towards right where the nib is. you know, and that's, you want to make sure that your pressure is going down like at this point. You don't want to apply the pressure towards the nib. So you're not mashing into the paper, you're drawing it kind of this way. So I don't know if that helps at all, but the video that we have on how to use a flex nib is a way better, you know, kind of visual representation of that. So I think that's kind of the situation that you're in. So when it comes to this particular pen, how much pressure is too much? You would have to almost try to have too much pressure. And then over time, are the flex nibs going to become easier with use than Noodler's ones? The steel is pretty tough. It's pretty resilient. You know, it's metal, so over time, yes, metal will bend and you know, it will loosen up a little bit. I haven't been using one nib consistently enough over the years to notice any type of a difference. You know, this is the pen that I've probably used more than any other, just in my demonstrations and stuff like that, but I don't like write with a flex pen daily or anything like that, so I haven't used any pen yet enough to notice a difference for me. But just, you know, physically, yes, over time it will weaken, it will spread a little easier, but I think you'd have to use it for quite a while for that to really be able to happen. Cool? All right, let's go over to question number 4, shall we? This is from Jag3848 on Instagram. I ordered a TWSBI Eco in fine, but I've been contemplating ordering a 580 or mini replacement extra fine nib and pulling the nib and feed out of the housing. Would this work? So this is a great question. I get this a lot. Customer care team gets this a lot because they do not offer replacement nibs for the Eco. And part of that is TWSBI on all of their other replacement nibs, their whole nib units. So the nib unit actually unscrews. This is a TWSBI Mini right here, and the whole unit that you would buy as a replacement from TWSBI, you know, would be this, the whole shebang. They do not have that for the Eco because the nib unit is fixed on the Eco. The nib and the feed can slide out of the housing, but it is not all one piece, such as the 580, the Vac 700, Vac Mini, the Mini, even the Classic. So it's a different kind of situation. Now, the thing I will say, you mentioned the 580 and you mentioned the Mini. The 580 actually has a larger nib. It's got a number 5 size nib. This one is a number 4 size, so it's slightly smaller. You can try to cram a 580 nib in here, but it's not going to work very well. So I would not recommend doing that. The nibs that you're going to want to stick to if you do want to get a replacement and do your own little hack would be the TWSBI Mini or the TWSBI Vac Mini. Okay, that uses the same nib as the Eco. And in order to actually be able to do it, you're going to have to buy the housing or a whole pen, whatever, but you're going to have to buy more stuff than you need, and you're going to have to yank it out of here, which is kind of a challenge because it's got a little housing. You got to pull the housing off, and then you got to kind of work the nib and the feed out of here. Now, the thing I will say, when you're dealing with TWSBI feeds, the fins on these feeds are rather soft. They're a little bit sharp, and sometimes these can be stuck in there pretty good. I made sure to work it out ahead of time. That way I wasn't sitting here struggling a lot on the video, but it can be a bit of a struggle sometimes. So, and it fits in a specific way in these housings, in the Mini and the Vac Mini. If you are yanking them out of here, it's easy to bend those feeds, the fins on the feed, so you got to be careful. And you got to realize if you do that, you're kind of doing it at your own risk. So take that into account. Sometimes you can just kind of wiggle the feed out of here, you know, just by kind of holding it just under the shoulders of the nib and kind of rock it back and forth a little bit as you pull it out, and the nib can come out on its own. You don't even have to mess with the feed. You may get fortunate in that way. Some pens are easier to do that than others. The Eco, you don't have to worry quite as much. I find that the nib and the feed on the Eco is a little bit easier because the Eco, it does not fit into one specific direction. It's just one kind of circular cavity inside the grip, so you can actually just take and spin it inside there. So it's not quite as tight a fit in there. The thing that I will say is if you are planning on swapping any nib from the Vac Mini or the Mini onto the Eco, you want to make sure that you're keeping the nib and the feed together as you're swapping, specifically with the Eco, because I've been told by TWSBI that in order to help improve some flow issues that they've had in the beginning, they have a different feed, or a feed with a different flow on the extra fine and the fine Eco than they do on the medium and the broad in the 1.1. So if you're swapping nibs and feeds on different pens, just keep them together, because that'll just be easier to kind of keep track of that, and then you won't run into any potential flow issues, and you have to kind of troubleshoot why that is, and really it's just because the feed isn't quite matching up and all that, but it can be done. So, you know, I just pulled the nib off of the mini here, and I have the nib off the Eco, so I can just kind of put that down. You know, I've pulled the feed out, and I can kind of keep them together, and yada, yada, yada. You stick it back in, and voila, it fits. So you can do that. It's kind of the only hack that I have for you right now for that, because the Eco's been out for, you know, about a year or so, and they have not come out with any replacement, you know, spare nibs. Just, it would have to be just the nib itself. I don't know that they have any plans to. So if you want to get a replacement nib on the Eco, personally, is it really worth it? I don't know, because you're going to pay $20 or $21 for a nib unit, and the Eco is $28.99. So you're paying 3/4 of the price of a whole new pen just to get another nib unit. So you determine for yourself if it's really worth it. It might be if, you know, the Eco nib unit that you've wanted has been out of stock forever and you can't get it, and the only way you can get the nib is on a different pen. But that's totally up to you. You use that for your discretion, but that is how it's done. All right, let's go to troubleshooting question. All right, this is from Ciaran M on Facebook. Hi Brian, any advice for filling from an ink sample using a vacuum filler? I recently got a TWSBI Vac Mini and struggling to get any of the ink up. Great question, and I forgot to grab the tools that I needed to demonstrate this, but I'm going to do that for you right now because I think I have everything in hand. So here, I got a couple of ink samples here. This will work. Yeah, make sure it's at the right level here. I've used some of these. So this is Ciaran Amber de Bremani, and I have a TWSBI Vac Mini Rachon. So the issue that you have with your vacuum filling pen, these pens fill a little more aggressively, I will say, than your piston fillers, your cartridge converters, and lever fillers and other methods like that, because it's filling by vacuum / pressure. You know, it's a pressure variance thing that you have going on. So this is actually a good pen to demonstrate with because it's clear. So you can see here there's a vacuum piston rod, there's a seal at the end, and as I'm pressing down, you can see there's actually some resistance on it because it's pushing it back up like magic. That's because there is a chamber right here, and as the seal is going down, it's creating a negative pressure inside the chamber. And it's got a little drop off right here that when it makes that noise, you can actually hear two things. You can hear a click, and you can hear a little, you know, I don't know how well you can hear it on the mic. So you're hearing a little burst of air, and then you're hearing that clicking sound. The clicking sound is the back of the pen that's hitting onto the filling mechanism. But the little burst of air that you're hearing is actually the rush of air that's coming into the pen, and the air is sucking in through the filling hole right here on the back of the grip where it meets the feed. So because you have this kind of rush of air that's sucking up through there, if you don't have that thing submerged in the ink, it's just going to suck it up so fast, it's not going to draw in ink as well as it would, say, a cartridge converter or something like that. Because normally when you're filling a cartridge converter, like say the Lamy Vista, I happen to have a lot of clear pens today. If you're sucking that in, normally you're not sucking in and going and trying to race and suck it all the way up. Essentially, that's the equivalent as if you drew up the piston on a cartridge converter pen in like a nanosecond. It would just go. That's what the equivalent would be. No, normally when you're filling, you're going like this. But there's a lot more intensity to the filling of a vacuum filling pen than there is to a cartridge converter or a piston or anything else. So you got to make sure you have it fully submerged in the sample. So there's kind of 3 tips that I have for you that you can try. Number 1 is you can try to just fill it straight up from the vial, which it can be done. It's easiest if you have a really full vial, not full as in all the way, but for us, we have 2 milliliters or above samples. We try to at least 2 milliliters. Sometimes it goes over, and that's bonus for you. But to fill this, you're going to stick it in here, and I'm going to see if I can actually I don't know how easily I can show it to you because the label kind of covers it a bit. But if you dip it in there, you can see that the filler hole ends up being right about here, right about the top level of where the ink is. So if I just draw it down in here, I'm not going to get very much. I'll go ahead and show you. So you can see there, it's actually raising up the level of the ink because air is coming out of the pen. And it draws in some, but you can see this is exactly what I was talking about. Let me zoom in a little bit so you see a better idea what's going on. So it's actually drawing in from that filler hole, but once it's drawn that initial bit in there, which is in the pen, you know, it's not a terribly low amount, but it's definitely not much. You know, it's like a 0.5 milliliter. So, you know, it kind of settles in there and the piston's out of the way. It's a little bit of ink, but it's not much, and it's definitely not the whole sample. So I'm going to kind of expel that back out of there and then show you kind of a better way to do it. So this is a good tip for really any pen that you're filling from a sample. If you want to get kind of a maximum fill out of a sample and you have a pen, and this pen doesn't have a super long nib, other pens that have a long nib, it's even more of an issue. But if you take the pen, it's filling right from here. So if you have the nib pointed up towards the sky and the feed is facing down, the filler hole is right under the feed there. So if you actually tilt your sample here, you're going to submerge more of that filler hole under the ink here. And so as I try to do this without spilling stuff everywhere, I'm going to put it down in there, and by tilting it, I'm going to hopefully be able to get more in the pen. Boom. You can see how much higher that is than it was just a second ago. You know, so I've gotten basically a full milliliter in this pen, which is almost a full filling for the TWSBI Vac Mini. So I was able to get pretty much a full filling just by tilting the vial. So that's a nice little hack for you, right? So just by tilting that vial and having the filler hole in the proper position, submerging the ink at an angle, I was able to fill it pretty much as you can go. Now, if it goes much below this ink level, you only have 1 milliliter left in your sample, that's not going to help you much. And I'm going to talk about how to address that. I think I'll just stay zoomed in here if you don't mind looking. I feel weird. I have my monitor over here and I'm looking at it, so it's what's going on. I know I say that like every time I'm looking over. You veteran Q&A watchers are probably like, yeah, we know, Brian, we know. Okay, so empty that out. So what do you do if you only have like half of a vial left? Well, you can't really use that. It's difficult on pretty much any pen, but other pens you can go really slow and you can kind of draw the ink up through the fins of the pen and all that, but you don't have that luxury with a vacuum filler. You kind of have to get it in there. So I'm going to show you another hack. With this pen specifically, the Vac Mini, wipe this off a little bit. I don't need more ink on my hands than I have to here. I can actually remove the nib unit, okay? And several vacuum filling pens, especially the TWSBI ones, will have this. So you can actually remove it, and you can see there's the seal that's like kind of right at the opening, and there's a little bit of space there where the seal is. Now this is probably not the recommended method, but it is method number 2. It's to just straight up pour that thing in there. So I'm going to try to do this without spilling ink all over myself like a fool. But just kind of gently go, la la la, look at that. Beautiful. And I can fill that thing all the way. So that's kind of cool, right? And I can definitely get the last of it. You have to be really careful. It's definitely not something you want to try and do like on a moving bus or anything like that, but it does work. You can do it that way. Now, you know, some downfalls of that is you could potentially spill ink everywhere, and you have to be really careful, but it actually works pretty well, as you just saw. So that's method number 2. The third and final method that I have for you today, which is probably the safest, really, of all these and the most surefire way to fill it, is to use an ink syringe, which we sell at gouletpens.com. But if you may not want to buy it specifically for this purpose, but it's a blunt tip needle. Don't get too concerned if you've never seen one of these before. If you leave these around your house, you'll look like a junkie, but if you have fountain pen people in your life, they will understand. You can just draw the entire contents of the vial up into your syringe. You can literally get every little last drop, and then it's very controlled because you can just you can drop the needle right past the seal, and you can just kind of, inject that right into there. You can fill it as much as you want. It's very controlled, and voila. So that's probably the safest method. You do have to clean out the syringe after you're done with it, so you may or may not want to go with that, but it is kind of cool. And, I'll dump out a tiny little bit, but I think I'm actually going to leave this inked up here. And I haven't written with my Vac Mini in a little while, so while it's all inked up, I got a medium nib on here, so yeah, I'll go ahead and give it a shot. seal it up, good to go. So there you go. This method works not only for TWSBI, vac minis, but the full-size vacs. It can work for other vacuum filling pens. It's a little more difficult, especially on the latter two methods, because not everybody has removable nib units like that. Specifically, I'm thinking like, Visconti with their power fillers. You can technically remove the nibs out of them on some of them, but you may or may not want to. So you have to be it's a little bit different with those. The tilting method is really kind of the preferred one for that. But the Vac Mini, big win for that one. So there you go. Like a nice little Emperor de Money inside there. That was fun. I like getting my hands a little dirty every now and then. All right, and my framing is all off. Give me a second. I'm like gonna be in and out a lot today. All right, got some business questions, shall we? Lee G on Facebook. Hey brain. I love that. I grew up with people typing and writing my name Brain constantly. So it's nice to see it every now and then because it just gives me a little chuckle. It's funny because I haven't gotten to the question yet. It's funny because my name is Brian. People switch the A and the I all the time. And I don't know if you've ever tried this, but if you just switch the inside letters of pretty much any words that you're typing, if you're reading fast, you will not catch it. It's just your brain, kind of scrambles it and reads and interprets and fills in the blanks. Your brain's very smart like that, or dumb like that, whatever you want to interpret that. So people write Brian all the time and spells brain and they don't catch it. In Word, autocorrect and stuff like that, my last name, Goulet, would often get autocorrected to Goblet. So all the time I grew up with people typing things to say brain goblet. It's kind of weird, but we all have our crosses to bear, right? So, hey brain, back in the olden days of Goulet Pens, you created custom pens. What are some tips you could give new hobbyists about creating pens or turning it into a business? All right, Lee, sorry if I felt like I was picking you on you for a second there, but what I was trying to say is I get called brain all the time. Anyway, let's see here. Turning a pen turning business into a viable, or pen turning hobby into a business. I have some experience with this. Though I'm a little rusty. It's been about 7 years since I've actually made a pen, but I have one to show you here today. Oh. This is one of the nicer pens that I actually still have in my possession. From my earlier days, I had no money, so any half-decent pen I would sell because I desperately needed the money. This was one that I actually kept for myself, and it is made of red Malay burl. So it's a burl wood pen that I polished using essentially acrylic. It's use cyanoacrylate glue, super glue, which is basically acrylic mixed with acetone. And you'd put that on here. And anyway, that's more than you need to know. So I did get a pretty good method for that down towards the end of my pen days. But this is a fountain pen that I made as I was transitioning out of my pen making days into the fountain pen world, because I started out making only roller balls, about 900 of them. And I did it for 3 years, most of that full-time or more than full-time, because I was trying to get the business off the ground. I was also a bit of a tool junkie and a wood hoarder, so it may or may not have impacted my profitability with the amount of tools and wood and materials that I would buy. So I didn't really know that much about running a business back then, but who does when they're 22 years old? Well, some people do, but I'm no Silicon Valley unicorn or anything here. I'm just a good old boy woodworker from Central Virginia. So I would buy a lot of wood because I thought it was pretty. But anyway, so I was able to sell some pens. A lot of them were corporate orders and things like that, which this was in the 2007-8 time frame. Once 2008-9 rolled around, corporate orders started to dry up pretty good, because I've heard about this thing called the housing crisis that happened in the United States, but it hit pretty hard and affected a lot of companies' profitability. And one of the first things to go when things get tight for companies is fancy wooden pens to give to their clients. So those really just dropped off for me severely. I was never really able to gain a lot of traction outside of the corporate kind of gift crowd. I tried some craft shows. I tried, specific things. I tried trademarking a Virginia Tech pen because I'm a Virginia Tech graduate. I actually went through the whole trademarking procedure and got the rights to engrave Virginia Tech on it, and I sold it, at the Virginia Tech functions and stuff like that. Never really sold well. That was the thing. I made Virginia Tech wooden wine bottle stoppers, and I went to a wine festival at Virginia Tech on campus. Did not sell a single one. So I really don't consider myself to be like that great of a salesperson, despite this whole thing that I've got going on here. I consider myself more just a guy that's kind of talking to you, and just I love pens and share pens with you, but I'm not a natural salesman, not like, Gary Vee is one of my, kind of icons, and the guy could, sell ice to a, Eskimo, and I cannot do that. So go figure. So when it came to like sales and stuff like that, I was never like super great at it. I was definitely more of like a look at this wood pen, look at this kind of thing. And so, go figure. So I was never really able to gain a lot of traction on it. Even though I sold 900 pens, I never drew a paycheck. I never drew a profit. It was kind of sad. And I did that for 3 years. And thankfully, I was able to find a niche that worked for me, which was fountain pens. And not making my own pens, but retailing other people's pens. So, it's interesting because the pens that I was involved in was only kit pens like this. Like you buy the metal components, you turn the wooden barrel or out of whatever material you want, and then you press the pieces together and voila, you have a pen. So these kits get pretty expensive. So those of you who know much of anything about business and manufacturing especially, you know that cost is everything. And labor too, but you have to try to keep costs down in manufacturing. And this pen right here, the metal components here, now this is with a stock, no name, Asian, not good Asian, but bad Asian nib that would come on it. This particular kit, I think, cost something like $30. Just the metal components. Not counting the wood or any of my labor, $30 for one raw component for one pen. So somebody would look at this and, you think a lot of people think $30 for any pen is a lot of money, not only just the raw components. So by the time you would spend all that labor, and it would take me, a solid hour and a half to 2 hours to make a pen like this, because it's really nice and takes a lot of time. So by the time I had my labor involved, the wood itself is expensive. It'd be like maybe $10 for a blank of wood like this, because it was stabilized and it's a burl and it's really expensive. So I have, $40 of raw material costs, or then I would replace the nib too. That's another like, $10 or so. So maybe $50 of raw material in the pen, plus my labor and all that kind of stuff. And then when you got all the other administrative things as far as running a business and sales and all this kind of stuff, you would easily have to sell this pen at $200, $250 to really have a viable business. I was never able to sell pens in that price range because I didn't have enough of a following, I didn't have enough of a story, I didn't have a unique enough product to really justify that. So that's the problem you get into when you are dealing with these kit pens. The raw material costs are just too great. Unless you're selling in that like $250, $350 kind of price range, which then the number of people that can afford that and would see value in that gets really small. So you got to find a good niche and work that, and that's its own challenge, and I can't even help you there because I don't know where they are. But the craft shows, that's not really where it's at. The one thing I have seen, let me finish on the whole kit pen thing. So in addition to the kit pens, I spent a lot of time on penturners.org, which is the International Association of Pen Turners. It's kind of like the fountain pen network for pen makers, right? So a lot of good information on there, a lot of good folks willing to share information, a lot of hobbyists, retirees, and stuff like that. A few people trying to make a living at it, but it's usually nothing more than a side business. The thing about that is, people post all kinds of cool ideas, things like doing this finish, right? Like using super glue as a finish was kind of an innovative thing that came on there. It starts to spread and then it's not as unique anymore. So people post this stuff and they post, really unique things. Like they had, I was around when the circuit board pen was a unique thing. So people actually took computer circuit boards, kind of melted them around a pen barrel, cast them in acrylic resin, and then you had a pen that looked like a circuit board. It was really cool. Very expensive and hard to do, But what happened is there's a lot of pen kit manufacturers that source this stuff out overseas, and they will watch these kind of hobby crafter sites like this. And I'm sure this happens in other industries too, but they would watch these hobbyists and crafters that would do all this kind of basically research and development for them, show them kind of how to do this, and then they would go and make the kits and then mass produce these kits and have them available to all of the other retirees and woodworking craftsmen that would want to make these things. I think most of the pen turning community is retirees, because they have the time, they have the money usually to kind of mess around in that. It's not a huge investment that it takes to get into pen making like this, but to try and make it a viable business is very difficult. I think especially because most of the demand for the materials for these pens is caused by the pen makers, not by the pen users. So it's definitely a supply-demand driven business. So the kits and supplies that make the pens is driven by the people that are manufacturing the pens and then giving them out as gifts to their grandkids or gifts to their, former employer, whatever. It's like, and so it ends up being the pen craftsman may sell it only to cover their costs because they're just doing it as a hobby, and that's the majority of the market. I don't think it's a demand market driven by pen users as much. That was my experience and my interpretation of it now, knowing even more about business than I did back then. So there's a real challenge with that. So in order to be successful selling these kit pens like this, you need to have something particularly unique, artistic, or you have to have some kind of material that's really unique, that would be special enough for somebody to do it. For example, if you found some vintage celluloid that was only used on a Schaefer XYZ, that's not a real pen, I'm saying some Schaefer pen or some Parker pen that was a very unique material that you acquired and you turned a pen out of that. That might be interesting to someone, but even still, the ones that I've seen that have been able to take the pen hobby making thing and turn it into an actual business, I think of companies like Bexley or Edison, or I think of individual artists like Ryan Krusak or Jonathan Brooks. Those are people. The Canalea Pen Company. There's other people who have just individuals or small companies that are able to kind of cross that chasm, if you will, from the hobbyist craftsman into legitimate pen manufacturing company. I would say that, they have all found different ways to kind of work it out. I think about Jonathan Brooks has gotten into a lot of unique materials, does some Urushi type stuff and some of that, lacquering and things and mixing different resins. So that's kind of his thing. Ryan Krusak has a lot of he's got an artistic background. So he does a lot of neat art and hand painting and stuff like that on his pens. That's good stuff. Then the pen is more of a canvas for the artwork. You see where I'm going with that. Edison and Bexley, they got into, not making the kit pens, but really making pens out of the whole resin, right? Or the whole material, ebonite and things like that. So the material becomes a little more unique and it gets into kind of more manufacturing raw stock as opposed to making pens as, hand-turned pens on a lathe kind of thing. You got to get away from that kind of stuff to really have a good viable business. So, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. You have to get your price up really high. There's a lot, not to mention all of the aspects of marketing, administration, taxes, accounting, and all those things that you need to run a business anyway, which there's all kinds of good books and stuff like that. You can literally buy starting an LLC for dummies or, small business for dummies and stuff like that. And if you know nothing, you can at least get somewhat of an idea of what you need to go and research more. Those books will help in that way. Or you talk to anybody that's kind of started a business from scratch, can give you a good foundation there. But, as far as the pen making things goes, it's an uphill battle. I will not sugarcoat it for you. I did my best and was not able to find my niche, but then it could have just been a timing thing. Who knows? I found my calling in the fountain pen world as a retailer and vlogger and stuff like that. But there could be something else that as you explore it, maybe you'll find your niche, that there's some unserved thing. It's been 7 years since I was in that business, so perhaps there's some other aspect of it that you could really hit on. Could be kind of neat. So I would say have fun, good luck to you, and I hope this was helpful. All right, got a few more questions here. Ooh, man, I am dragging on. Dang it, I got 4 more questions. All right, I'm gonna rock and roll here. So this is from lateeps on Instagram. Happy New Year! What were the 2 biggest hurdles in years 1 and 2 that ultimately led to the success of your company? So kind of piggybacking off of the pen making thing. So, it depends on what you define year 1 and 2 for Goulet Pens, because the big early stage is kind of what I just talked about, which was the pen making thing, which is about 3 years. And then once I got into the online retail, selling other people's products, that was kind of it was a related but very different part of the business. That's what we really consider to be our company's anniversary, is when we started selling fountain pen materials. So I'll kind of cover both. So in the earliest of days, the hardest thing was to find a viable product that people would buy. Just when you're in business, I started out as it was a hobby for me, so I was just making it because I wanted, and I was like, I got to sell these pens if I want to keep making pens, because I can only use so many and I want to fund my hobby. Anything where you start from funding a hobby and it's not driven purely by demand from the customer, that's a little bit harder thing. So you got to find out what it is that people even want. And for me, it ended up not even being at all the product that I had invested several years of my life in. It got me to the right track, and that was okay, but I certainly spent a lot of time developing skills and honing areas that now I do not use at all, because I was just in the complete wrong place. But it goes like that. You just don't know what people want. So that was the first challenge. The second one was figuring out my foot from my elbow when it comes to running a business in general. I was coming out of college. I had done, I basically kind of paid my own way through school. I did a little bit on my own thing. It was just a sole proprietor. It wasn't complicated at all, but I basically, power washed houses and did handyman and Mr. Fix-It and painting and all that kind of stuff for friends, neighbors, whoever would hire me to pay my way through college. And so I had some experience kind of marketing and hustling and working hard, but I was not building a business per se with that. So trying to build a sustainable ongoing business was very difficult, and trying to figure all that out from scratch was a huge challenge. And I would not have been able to do it without Rachel. There's no question about that, especially on the logistics side. I mean, we are a tag team duo in that respect. So those 2 things were the hardest things in the earliest days. Once we actually got into the fountain pen thing and we had a viable business model, the fountain pen retailing, there were 2 things that were kind of the biggest challenges that ultimately led to our success. Number 1 was learning what fountain pens were and how to use them. So kind of the education piece of it. I did not know anything about fountain pens, and I had kind of an epiphany when I went to the DC show in 2009, said, I need to learn about fountain pens, and this could be something. There's demand here, there's a customer base, there's, passion around this industry. I need to get into this. So, but I did not have a working knowledge of fountain pens in the least. So I had to figure it all out from scratch. And that was difficult in the beginning, but it gave me such a solid foundation and gave me such empathy for new fountain pen users that still to this day, that is like my primary thought, is how do I get people into fountain pens who are interested in fountain pens? So that has very much worked itself. That's a comprehensive education piece of our mission statement, our company. And then learning to engage, listen, and communicate directly with customers we served. So the whole exemplary service side, we actually have both of these components in our company's mission statement. Not surprising. So the exemplary service, not only from our media side, doing this kind of thing, literally you ask me questions and I will answer them in a video. That's really cool. Like, that's very engaging. I love doing that. Still to this day, as busy as crud as I am, I still love doing that and make time for that every week. And I love doing it, and I'll keep doing it as long as I possibly can. And then just, from a customer service side, continuing to engage, you're having a very troubleshooting mindset, not just, oh, I want to return this pen. Okay, just here's your tracking number. No, why do you want to return this pen? What's going on? It's not flowing properly. Really, what kind of ink are you using? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, that's because you need to hold it at a steeper angle. Da-da-da-da. Teaching actually people how to use their pens and stuff like that, instead of just saying, oh, okay, I'll initiate this return. Having that service mindset and really going above and beyond, educating all that feeds into the way we do business now and the whole team here and how they operate. And a lot of that stems from the early days when we had to figure all that out. And really a lot of that comes from the fact that we didn't have any customers. And so I would engage on social media and be like, what the heck is going on with fountain pens? Oh, well, they're awesome because of this. Really? Okay, well, what kind of paper do you use? Well, we use this paper. Why do you use this paper? Because of this. Okay, But the problem is I can't find it. Why can't you find it? Well, it's only sold in a couple of places. Why is that? Well, da-da-da-da. I'd be like, well, let me try and find it. And I would carry some paper and be like, hey, I found that cool paper you were asking about. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Let me buy your paper. Voila, you know, and we just kind of kept on going with that. So it's an engagement with the community and, you know, talking with people. And now it's to the point where it's like, we know a lot about fountain pens and we're educating people and still getting a lot of great feedback, and then providing feedback to manufacturers and so on. So it works out really well. So there's a zillion different things that are involved when it comes to learning a business and learning products, especially ones that are as technical as fountain pens can be sometimes. But it's been an amazing process for me over the last 7 years, and hope to keep it going. And you know, that's you could probably take a lot of aspects of what we've done and apply it into different other niche areas, and do some pretty cool stuff. All right. Couple of personal questions to close it out here. This one is from Korey K on Facebook. I was wondering how you personally feel about limited edition pens. I know some people don't care, but there are others that are obsessed with this feature. I enjoy limited edition pens, but dislike how much more they cost because of it. Anyways, I just wanted to know your thoughts. Well, the thing I'll say is that limited edition pens are not for everyone. Literally, they're not for everyone. They're limited. That's the whole point. So in their inherent nature, they're not going to be mass appeal, because that is not what they're for. If it was mass appeal, then everyone would get really upset, because if everybody wanted it and only a few people could get it, that would actually be really bad for the company, because they would get a lot of negative goodwill or bad will or whatever you want to call it. So it's meant to kind of hit a specific target, right? A lot of times it's a more expensive price, not just because, hey, let's make it limited and make people pay a lot, you know, because there is a price component that could be supply and demand. If you make fewer pens, the demand will be higher, therefore you can justify a higher price. Yes, there is that, and there may be some of a component of that, especially with some brands that may not, well, let's tweak this one feature and put a number on it and call it limited edition. I don't see that quite as much these days. That may have been more of a trend, you know, a decade or so ago, when it was like anything limited edition was hot. These days, it's not quite so much. You got to work for it a little bit more. But I would say usually a lot of the limited editions you see, you know, a la Visconti, Homo sapiens, London Fog is one example. But there's lots of other examples. You know, we've done limited runs on Edison Nouveau Premiers, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But you know, you run into these things where it's okay, it's a limited run, you know, London Fog, for example, it's 888 pieces worldwide. That's not that many pens. I mean, it's a decent number of pens, but worldwide, 7 billion people in the world, only 888 pens. It's not that many pens. So you still have the research and development, the marketing costs, the quality control, the photography, the distribution, the advertising, all of that stuff. You still have all of that. You have to issue product codes for every single thing. You got to communicate it to all your retailers. As a manufacturer, there's a lot of work that's involved with launching any new product, and there's a certain fixed cost associated with R&D and all that stuff. So that cost does not change whether you sell one pen or a zillion pens. You know, you got to have all that stuff in place. So if you're selling a smaller number of pens, those fixed costs get spread out over a fewer number of pens. Therefore, the cost has to be higher. It just has to be, because otherwise they make no money on it. And why would they do it if they made no money on it? So depending on how much money the company wants to make on their limited edition, they may or may not price it lower or significantly higher. So a lot of that depends on the strategy and stuff like that. But I would say in general, very much generalizing here, a lot of the limited edition stuff that I see, I am, for a good majority of them, would say they're not making bank on the limited edition stuff. I think most of the manufacturers are doing it to attract attention and excitement, for one, into the brand. You know, it's from the manufacturer side. It's exciting. They get to develop something around a new theme. You know, these are very passionate people, even all the way up to the manufacturers. They're passionate individuals who are in this. You know, they manufacture the same pens day in and day out. It's fun to do new things. It keeps things fresh and challenging and interesting. And so I think that there's a certain amount of, you know, new pen products that like to come out just because it's fun. And I know as a retailer, I like new things when they come out because it's part of the fun. But you know, it's good for the brand to do it on a somewhat regular basis, just because it keeps you top of mind for people, you know. As far as, you know, the customer's perspective, your perspective, my perspective as a customer, you know, Pens that are limited edition tend to be a little more themed. They tend to have some kind of theme associated to them, and that can make them a little more hit or miss. You know, I'll say in general, just having a pen that is a limited edition, for me, doesn't really move the needle for me, you know, especially if it's all else equal, same price and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, I don't really like that color. I don't really like that theme, that pattern, whatever. It's not for me. And I'll just pass on it and not think about it again. But, you know, just like anybody else, most of the themes are not going to be for you because they're limited. But if that theme hits and it's just the right thing for you, it's like, oh my gosh. You know, London Fog, I keep bringing this up because it's an example of a pen that, you know, granted, I had a little advance notice because I am a retailer for the brand. But as soon as I saw this pen, I was like, yep, I'm getting one of those. You know, it's just like, yeah, it hits on so many of the right things. I love the color scheme. I love the demonstrator, the vacuum, you know, hook safe cap, all this kind of stuff. I love it. And I was like, dang it, I got to get it. How much is it? Ouch. Okay, that sucks. But I'll make it work. You know, it's just like, you know, and it's not every pen that's like that, but if you are into the limited thing, it's just like, yeah, I'll sell my childhood baseball card collection if I have to. I want this pen. It speaks to me that way because they made it for me. Because literally, they're making it for you if you're interested in, you know, for those few people out there, those 888 people for this pen. Other people, it might be 100 or 50 or whatever. It's like that pen is going to be made for you if you are the one that is finding it, you know, attractive for you. So I think it's really kind of fun. I think it's interesting. You shouldn't buy a pen just because it's limited edition. I personally do not ascribe to buying pens as financial investments. I do not think that you should buy pens because of a retirement plan or anything like that. Just like any other collectible, it's going to be so hit or miss. I don't think it's a good, reliable way for you to fund any type of future investment. I think there's a lot of other ways you can do it that are a lot more liquid and all that. But I do think that if it's something that speaks to you, you want to build a collection for yourself, you want to pass it to your grandkids, kids, whatever, that's cool. There's a story to that. You can use the pens in the meantime and have a great time, really enjoy them, and you can enjoy a pen that you connect with, that you know is limited, that is kind of unique. And that's really why you should do it if you do it. So that's kind of where I land. All right. 2 more questions. I'm running a little long today, aren't I? How long am I going? Oh my gosh, I'm an hour already? Holy moly. Okay, let's wrap this up. Arch Image on Twitter. I already asked one. You got 2 questions in this Q&A, but you gave me a good one on this one. So I'll try to make this a quick one, but man, I'm really going on and on today. All right, what's your favorite pen for the weirdest reason? I liked this question, so I had to take it. My answer would be the Edison Nouveau Premier Macassar limited edition. So this is a pen that we came out with in 2013. It's a limited edition, so it wasn't a part of our seasonal thing. It was a special pen that we made. Only made a certain number of them. And this is the artist proof that I have, so it's very special. What's interesting about this, if you are familiar with this pen at all, this pen does not look like the pen that we ultimately ended up offering, which was this. So if you look at these 2 pens next to each other, they're very different. In fact, they're inverse of each other. Long story short, or let's go long story long. So this pen is the only pen like it in the world. So what happened was Edison at the time had switched over to a new ebonite supplier. They were kind of, testing out different materials and stuff like that, testing out the quality and stuff. So they had samples of a lot of the different stuff. Cool, right? Not unusual. That happens all the time. So we were speccing out doing, an ebonite pen because we'd done a couple previously and they did well and we enjoy it and ebonite's cool material, so we did it. So we picked this pen. I loved the fact that it looked like Macassar Ebony, which is a pen that I had worked with out of wood back in my pen making days. It really spoke to me. So I was like, this sounds awesome. The challenge, and we don't do a lot of pre-orders here, but we ended up doing a pre-order for this particular pen because it was a new supplier, and not having done a limited edition ebonite pen, we thought it would be a good idea to pre-sell so that we knew how many pens to make. Brian Gray does this all the time. He'll do group buys and pre-sells and stuff like that. So he was like, let's do a pre-sell, then I'll know how many rods to order, and then I can make the pens, we can ship them out to everybody, and they'll all be happy. It'd be a couple month delay, but it should be good. And I was like, that sounds good to me. Rather than making pens on spec and then either being way under or way over, it's just a lot better way to go about it sometimes. So what happened was he made this sample out of this. We took pictures, we shot a video, we did everything with the promotion of this pen. We pre-ordered a bunch, you know, and then once the material actually arrived in the bulk to Brian Gray, this is what it looks like. And we were like, what the heck is this? Why is this a completely opposite color of this? And we were like, did they ship us the wrong stuff? What's going on? Long story short, the ebonite supplier had accidentally sent us the wrong sample. This was the real color. This is what it is. They don't make this. This isn't even a thing. They explained it to us. What happens is, in the extrusion process for these ebonite rods, in order to get this kind of ripple pattern, there's an extrusion process involved at some point. And as it's being extruded, when they first start the process of mixing the colors, it takes a little while for it to get to the right mixture. So what happened is, at first, at the very beginning of the rod, it is dark because it's mostly the swirl color that's in there. And then after a couple of feet get extruded out, it gets into its regular color, and the rest of the stock looks like this consistent color. Normally they toss this stuff or do something else with it, I don't know, but they normally don't send it out as sample stock to new customers that they're dealing with. So a bit of a miscommunication, it happens, I get it, but we were kind of in a pickle because we had communicated out and pre-sold a ton of these. So we ended up having to backpedal, explain the whole situation to all of our customers. We reached out individually to every customer and said, hey, we sold you this, we can't go deliver it to you, that sucks. Our bad. We can give you this if you still want it, and we'll give you some different stuff. And we tried to make it work for everybody. We gave them an opportunity to back out and store credit and stuff like that. And then we said, oh, I don't even have a nib on this one, but we said we can give you a choice of gold or silver trim if you want, choice of a two-tone or a stainless nib, and we'll accommodate that way. Most everybody was super cool. We ended up having, I think it was 12.5 or 24 people that ended up backing out, which I thought that was pretty low, given how many pens we had sold. So it was a complete just like, what, I was like, what am I going to do? But we just had to completely fess up and be like, here's the situation, guys. We're dealing with this kind of stuff. We're trying to do cool, new custom things. And this is what happens sometimes in the manufacturing world. So it was a little raw, but at the same time, I love working with Brian Gray and with Edison for that reason, because he's so open and forthright with sharing this, deeper knowledge with me. I've got a little bit of a manufacturing background, so I can appreciate where he's coming from there. And then you guys are so great about receiving that information and then working with us that it just ends up working. And it's actually, for me, it ended up turning into a better opportunity to show how good we can service customers when things go completely sideways, by having a complete opposite color that comes out. So for me, this pen is my favorite for the weirdest reason, because it's one, unique, and it reminds me of a wood that I used to love. And it also is a reminder to me of kind of the crazy situations you can find yourself in business, and how, good vendor relationships, having a good kind of, personal accountability mindset can really help not only to overcome a challenging situation like that, but then come back with even more loyal customers. And we didn't skip a beat after that event happened, because it wasn't a big scandal. We completely owned up to everything that happened. We made it right for everybody. We may have lost a few dollars in the short term, helping people out, but it made for an overall better situation in the end. So love the pen for that reason. Last question for this week. I know I'm on a roll today. Hillary J on Facebook says, what do fountain pens mean to you on a personal level? Man, I don't know why I piled so many of these questions. I think, just from, Christmas and being out for a little bit. I know I had a Q&A published last week, but I shot it before Christmas, actually. So I guess not having filmed one in 2 weeks, I was kind of pent up a little bit. So I was like, let me take some of these cool questions. Anyway, what do fountain pens mean to me on a personal level? Well, I'm obviously super into fountain pens from like a technical standpoint. I love tinkering with the pens. I love learning about how they work, and just I'm very comfortable having pens like all over my desk in my life. It's just, I've always been a fiddler. Even as a kid, I didn't know fountain pens, but I would always take apart my mechanical pencils and stuff like that, and I would just fiddle, and I would constantly be taking apart pens and playing with different pieces and modifying them and stuff like that. It's just very natural. I've loved tools, I've loved all that kind of stuff. So from that standpoint, yes, they're very rewarding to me just as a user, just as a lover of pens. That's really kind of cool. So I totally connect with that. Even getting more into it than that, the artistry, the craftsmanship, the detail, the passion, the product development, there's that kind of stuff. But then the history, the technology, the design, all the inspiration that goes into these things and has for the last 150 years, basically. The connection with the written word and all that means and has impacted throughout history. It's just such a, integral part of our life, writing, that is in kind of just such transition right now, especially with computers and text and, speech, dominating so much in video and all this. And what does that mean for fountain pens and just the whole written word in general? It's just this very interesting time where things are transitioning so much. I'm fascinated by all of that, and I find that to be very interesting, and I'm very honored to even be a small ding into the universe of that whole writing experience, to steal a Steve Jobs term there. But I'm so just grateful to be a part of this whole thing. For me, it's my livelihood, so it provides for my family. It gives me a creative outlet, an outlet for leadership and building upon my own career and experience, which I'm super appreciative for. I've always loved taking on challenges and getting in leadership opportunities. That's why I voluntarily joined a military school within a civilian school at Virginia Tech. I was in the Corps of Cadets, was not affiliated with an ROTC. I just wanted the military discipline amidst my college experience. Who does that? Not many people. There are a few, but not many people. So I enjoy doing that kind of stuff, and I very much enjoy kind of taking that on. And fountain pens have provided me that way of building a business and way of, developing myself as a leader and a visionary and stuff like that within, this community. So that's super cool, and I love that and appreciate that for sure. It's given me independence. It's given me kind of a vehicle for my own creativity and inspiration. I'm financially independent. I don't have a boss. I have lots of bosses because you all are my customers, so you tell me whether I'm doing a good job or not, but you know what I mean. I don't have a direct boss that tells me I should or shouldn't do everything. I'm accountable to my team and to all of your customers, so it's a whole different level of responsibility there, but I get to, it's really kind of, the playground is a wrong word, but it's really more of a way for me to experiment and try a lot of what I perceive to be some great opportunities for running a business and treating people well and, treating team members well as customers. And, I get to just, it's a daily activity of doing things right and facing challenges and being challenged from a value standpoint and from a technical standpoint and an intellectual standpoint. It's just a way to grow kind of every single day. So I've had a lot of passions in my life: woodworking, photography, cycling, military, you name it. A lot of different things that I've tried and done. I thought I was going to be an electrician for a while. I was going to be a police officer. I was going to go in the military. I was going to do a lot of different things. But fountain pens actually have been my longest kind of contiguous passion that I've had in my life from a career standpoint. Obviously, my wife, my family, all that, takes precedence over any career that I would have. But from a kind of a work and kind of personal standpoint there, fountain pens have been the longest running and more time involved and intense and rewarding thing that I've done basically my whole life. So that is really pretty cool, and I'm honored by that. And honestly, I'm not like this, serial entrepreneur where I want to start 10 different companies and run them all at the same time. I'm really pretty invested in this, and I'm a craftsman at heart, and I love developing the craft, and I view this business as a craft. I view pens as a craft, and I really enjoy learning it and getting more mastery every day, understanding it deeper from a technical standpoint and wider from, just the impact that it has on the community and understanding on manufacturing and marketing and just getting and covering a lot of different areas. It's really enjoyable for me. So fountain pens are the vehicle that allow me to do all that kind of stuff. So that's very much, just kind of where it all lands for me. Kind of a unique situation for me, but a little insight into the brain of Brian Goulet. That's it for the questions this week. I do have a question for you, a question of the week to kind of close out a longer than normal Q&A. But my question of the week is, what's one thing that you really wish Goulet Pens would offer in terms of a product or a service or something like that. You know, I'm thinking about 2017, you know, we got a lot of things going on. We already have a lot of stuff planned for 2017, but I always love to get feedback from you. And I feel like while we're in a kind of forward thinking mode for the year, I want to plant the question for you to say, what is it that you think that we could really do to serve you better? What would you really want to see us offer? So go ahead and answer that in the comments on YouTube or on the blog. I would love to hear what you have to say. So that's it for now. Kicking off a strong 2017 with a nice healthy dose of Q&A. I'll try to keep them shorter next time, I promise, but I'm sure you don't mind too much. If you're watching at this point, hour and whatever, 14 minutes in, then you're probably enjoying it. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for supporting me, my company. You can view a lot of what I've talked about, just about everything I've talked about today on gouletpens.com. Check it out. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and right on.